me also make you guys co-hosts, just because I won't be able to stay like until 10. I'll have to leave a bit earlier. So in any case, connection doesn't drop and I can
Do you
upload
think
it.
I should record then, perhaps to have a second?
Yeah, it could be good if you could, but the recording will work fine for me. It's just that I'll have.
Actually, I am only able to pause or stop the recording now. Maybe because I'm co-host. I'm not sure. Let me see.
Yeah, but anyway, I won't stop recording. The recording will be fine. Like that's the least of the problem. Just in case I'm not here and you guys want to share screen or something. So.
Yeah, let me see what I got here. Yeah, well, we suggested a reading of Luca Fraser's Go Back to Anthem in order to, I don't know, get a sense of maybe some examples, some historical contextualization of the stuff that Pedro was presenting last week. And perhaps, I'm not sure, I think this one, maybe it's just me and Pedro who reread it. Chapter 7 of Intelligence and Spirit also is quite interesting in order to give some kind of flesh to these ideas, even though it's not very detailed in its presentation of ludics and linear logics and all of that. But it kind of connects this kind of framework to a certain philosophical, a certain context that might shed some light into why certain strategies are being pursued instead of others. Even though, I mean, my critique of it used in that way would be that I'm not sure that is Girard's own motivations. I don't think so. But it is more, you can see it going on in the first generation of his students. For instance, Alain Leconte, his book deals with inferentialism, kind of this kind of philosophy of language that I'm interested in and Pedro is interested in. And ludics as a way to kind of offer a formal infrastructure to it, in a sense. But I am resistant to assigning this objective to Girard himself. I'm not sure what Peter thinks of it because you read like the latest stuff that he wrote. Is he connected to inferentialism in any way or this kind of thing? I mean, Girard himself.
I don't think it's like he never really mentions this. I think this is something that comes from Leconte, but also like because well, yes and no, because what I think it's the connection between these guys and the philosophy of language is like trying to model language as like concurrent computations, right? Like in terms of like natural language processing and like what is the computational framework that would allow us to like model language in like very sort of like good like old-fashioned AI, like 60s AI, like the sort of like some like where you like you would program like all the concepts in a language and the programs would somehow like by knowing what everything means, it would put it together in the correct form and would automatically achieve like consciousness, which is sort of like the sort of like 60s idea of AI. But I think it's like in these guys, which is also what the like Oxford people do with like different things, right? But they're using like computer programs to parse natural language, and I think that this is sort of the connection. I don't like know explicitly how Leconte arrives at inferentialism, but I thought that like Reza's, despite not having like really good like maybe like like I don't know if he doesn't understand enough to go beyond what the guys are saying. I think that's what I got from reading the book. Like he understands really well what's going on and what are the implications, but he doesn't understand enough to sort of build upon it. And I think that this is kind of a problem, but I think that he gives like really good motivation, especially from the computational side of it. And I think that what ends up putting all of these people together is this sort of like idea of like actually of pragmatics in a certain sense. And I think that this is
sorry.
no, it's just that like I think that in the end, like it's not that these people all have like very similar goals, but it's just that like the sort of like the pragmatic piecemeal construction of it all is what brings them together, and what gives also like the sort of like good like what I think it's interesting in regards to like stuff like in like to answer the question of like what computation is, right? Like and what do we do with it? I think that this is something that like somehow like it feels like it's very fortuitous that all of this comes together.
Yeah, the thing that I mean that seemed clear from the stuff that I looked into Girard is that, I mean, if you just compare Lucas' text and Rez's chapter, her text is a text on the history of mathematics, right? The history of mathematical logic, and you kind of get the like she poses a problem regarding Hegel and mathematical logic or mathematics in general, and she pulls that thread, and that thread leads you through a bunch of people, Boole and Hilbert and Gensen and so on, and then you arrive at Girard, right? So the motivation to Girard in her text, to his developments, are purely mathematical. Like it's never gets to questions. I mean, you get, let's say, Curry and things like this, but even the idea of programs, types, and so on, they come into the description more from the history of logic point of view than I mean, there's almost no mention to language in that text, if I'm not mistaken. Like if you just search in the text the word language, I think you almost don't find it.
There's a footnote that is quite impressive about Curry saying that you need absolutely U language, a language in use in order to build
but like
this is the big, I mean, this was a big, okay, this is like a big assertion about language, or a natural language at least, in her text. I don't remember other stuff.
No, but towards the end, when she mentions like his like the Platonic descent, which she's talking about logos, like that's sort of natural languagey, no?
Okay, let's just separate natural languagey from like discussing the nature of
yeah, sure.
And I mean, I'm just trying to separate two motivations and then try to kind of localize better where you guys stand in this process, because I have the impression that the better I also understand like the motivations for you guys to go into this, it's easier also to separate what is cool to go further into, what is kind of besides the point. But like from her perspective, I felt like it's the relation between formalism and dialectics and this kind of shift, which I think it's absolutely in line with, for example, Badiou and other guys who stopped worrying about formalizing the dialectic and realize that there is actually a dialectics of formalization, right? Which is there's a particular history there, and you want to make some steps intelligible in the process by changing that axis, rather than saying, let's formalize the dialectic, which is kind of what you will get, for example, with paraconsistent logic, Priest, and things like this. Oh, dialectics functions like this, so let's put it into mathematical form. You get something else, which is the history of formalism, which functions dialectically. So nobody needs to actually mention dialectics or Hegel to be doing something which can be read in a Hegelian way, making explicit or contingent or circumscribed commitments that previously were universal and then making them treatable, giving negativity an important place. Like, don't need to even know Hegel existed to see the history of logic as something that is developing in that direction. And it includes anti-Hegelians like Russell. But I had a bit more trouble, and perhaps because I didn't read with this level of attention the other chapters in Rez's book, but I had a bit more difficulty with, I understand definitely the general motivations, right? He arrives at the chapter already with an idea of we need to derive we need to kind of find a way to add to our automata, to our toy model, some capabilities that concern semantic. We want to do this in a way that is not ex nihilo. So we need to kind of derive semantics out of syntax. And then it seems like this stuff with Girard shows that that's possible. But that kind of makes sense. It's just postpones the motivation, because you need to understand why are you then to show that this is possible is to show that it is possible at which level. And that kind of makes me a bit, it's not a genetic study of, well, we now have a model for how to acquire semantical capacities out of non-semantical environments. And we can use this as a sort of lens to go back to the history of humans and investigate a certain moment in our history, or to go to neuroscience and look for...
It's really weird that he doesn't do that, right? Like I caught myself thinking a lot this, like while rereading the chapter today, it's like how do you go from this into sort of like this sort of like super Hegelian mode of, you know, it's just like the like the structure of concepts is sort of like a thing that arrives from Geisting activity, as he says, rather than just like it is a kind of, yeah, like natural process that it's like evolutionary, and it's sort of like hinging on certain like specific environmental conditions and so on and so forth. I thought it was like really weird how he can sort of like say all of this stuff and then go like towards like a completely different direction.
You mean what, in the last chapter after this one?
Well, I mean, just like the overall tone of the book, and I think we discussed this previously, right? Like the sort of like how he like, it's not like a very like he doesn't go from sort of like, you know, like I don't know, like I because I end up thinking as I already think, you know, is like he doesn't posit the construction of these problems through an evolutionary perspective, which sort of like would somehow like explain like literally how it happens, right? Like he doesn't really put things in these terms. Like he avoids even avoid like addressing things in terms of like how like language acquisition by humans have happened, like how this is contingent on a series of environmental changes and so on and so forth. And I think it was like, it's really weird because when he starts positing the question of like the difference between Turing computing machines and like the paradigm of computation as interaction, he sort of like gives that away in a weird way. He's like, oh, but then you don't have the system which precludes environmental and like
I was going to mention that, like the point of entrance has something to do with that, because you have to have like dealings with the environment in order for something like this language, the distinction between syntax and semantics, therefore language to emerge, right? I think it makes it thinkable in a certain sense. This is why I think it's really it's not the best written chapter of the book, but it is my favorite in the sense of having more unfulfilled promises. There is something to be worked upon there, but he doesn't go very far in it, really. I mean, and he's very hostile to naturalism too. You must know that, right? So it's quite weird that he's always using this kind of thing, like difference between agent and environment, the relationship between predator and prey, all these biological stuff that basically could justify the reconstruction of all these frameworks in, you know, evolutionary biological terms or naturalistic terms at least. And but actually he's much more of a Kantian than a naturalist in a certain sense. Like, for instance, this is criticized in the book, and I heard him say a lot of different times that you know, arguments from evolution are not real arguments. Like, oh, what? So what? That things evolve to be that way. What does that mean? Like, he always feel that this needs fleshing out, and the fleshing out always comes in the form of some transcendental structure. So this may be a problem or not with his approach. So, but he's fundamentally hostile to naturalism in that sense, like using evolutionary history as explanatory of capacities. I mean, he concedes that some of these have to obtain in that way, but he's always resistant to it. You see, to full naturalization. This is something that I get very clearly from Reza.
But okay, I kind of get that feeling, and you already explained that to me a couple of times, and I think it makes total sense with the chapter. The thing that I wanted to understand is, okay, I see from the chapter that you guys suggested that we read that there are some specificities to his approach, but his motivation is, well, we want to talk about, let's say, intrinsic description of a being capable of language, reason, and so on. So we cannot start from our contingent development. We need to give a transcendental development because it's not about us, it's about any intelligence, right? That's how I got it. And then under the conditions that he already poses for himself, the whole ludics linear logic stuff comes in, and then he gives that example of the monkey and the example of that. But it's a sort of, okay, it's a sort of, I want to know, I want to spell out in detail all the necessary conditions for anything to be called a self-developing intelligence, right? It seems to me that, I mean, my problems with him are not naturalistic. My problems with him is that I think I don't know, I find it restrictive for its generality. Like, it's so exhaustive and so full of references. And for me, like, it's really hard to follow. Like, I just find it's not written to clarify for a reader. It's written to show me that he knows, and that kind of annoys me a bit. But in the end of it, I feel so kind of overwhelmed with the amount of stuff that is like when I just go back to the basic idea, it just seems to me that, for example, the book is not ready to assume that that construction might not fit human beings in the end and fit something else. Like, we might conclude that there is no human intelligence and there is other things that are intelligent, which I think would require to be a bit more general. Like, it's not really I think sometimes it turns some specific human exception into a transcendental argument, because it's already a lot of humanism and a lot of preconceptions in a certain approach to the philosophy of language and things like this. There are conditions and commitments there. It's not obvious that I would want first that he would show me that his approach, his philosophical approach, is so unconstrained by human centrality, and then I would accept that it can guide me to this sort of transcendental analysis. Whereas my impression is that there's a lot building to it, like that's kind of below the surface. But then even in that case, it's so exhaustive in still giving you many more layers of conditions that we usually get, that you kind of forget about that. But it gives me what ultimately the sensation that Pedro was saying, like, you're clearly talking about humans or very close to humans. So why are you not using more situated scientific kind of basis? Because there is a history for a being like the one you're describing. If he was making a purely transcendental argument, I don't think anyone would even raise that question, you know? I think the question gets raised because you kind of get the feeling in the end that it was more constrained, the sort of reconstructed thing that he's trying to do, than it seems. I don't know. But regardless of any of that, like, I wanted to know how this kind of fits for you guys. Like, is it the same sort of general project, but perhaps with slightly different tools? Or you feel like Girard on one hand, Rez on the other, there is something else where you guys are? Just because I wanted to situate myself better with how these things fit for you guys, you know?
No, I think there's I think the answer is connected to what you were just saying about certain things that are built in. Well, first you have to really read through the whole book in order to see what's going on in the transcendental argument, and maybe accept in good faith that it's not just about humans, because there is a history to those arguments that go back to Wittgenstein and then Sellers and Brandon. There's this whole lineage, and this is what really connects me to reason. Really, this is the whole point. And this, I actually rehearsed a little bit of that in our presentation on Justin Evans's paper, Space of Reasons, Capital as Space of Reasons. That has to do with the difference between, for instance, pattern governed and rule obeying, all that kind of typology of behaviors that actually Sellers that comes up with. So the thing is, of course, this might, for somebody who accepts just pattern governed behavior as some form of intelligence, this might look like you are raising the human standard as the universal standard of intelligence, but I'll go through it otherwise. I would say that there is a qualitative difference between pattern governed and rule obeying that warrants. I'm not sure about the specific predicate. I'm not attached to it, but might warrant preserve one predicate for rule obeying behavior or full-fledged conceptual behavior, and a different predicate for pattern-governed behavior, for instance.
Why are you putting in those terms? Like, were you under the assumption? I mean, and perhaps I didn't even understand what the difference really is, but are you saying in the sense that you felt like for example, my position was that there is no difference? Or like, who is the other that is?
I think you have a more unrestricted use of intelligence, of thinking that comes from Badiou. Yes, I think this is a difference that we have. Like, I am resistant to the idea that any pattern-governed behavior that presents some kind of novelty is thinking. I'm resistant to that. So I think.
But why is it called pattern-governed behavior? Like, give me an example of what we've been talking about that reads like pattern-governed. Just so, because perhaps I didn't get the difference as well.
Pattern-governed behavior, for instance, for Sellers is the dance bees, the dance of the bees, for instance. They do the dance because of the pattern. We can use the pattern the pattern is explanatory of the dance because it does a set of movements, and by doing this set of movements, its colleagues can locate food and all of that. So there is a pattern going on, but they are not acting that way. They are instantiating the pattern without acting because of the pattern, because it is correct to do that. So you can like map the difference between causes and reasons in that sense. A reason is more like a criterion than a cause. You can be caused, but this is not really a reason in a sense. Like, and a reason, when you act for a reason, you use a criterion for acting. Like, you can be caused by different set of things, and even show rational behavior that has to do with the adoption of certain criteria, in a certain sense. So this is why I am reticent upon even the thesis of Justin Evans that capital is a kind of restricted space of reasons, because it seems to me that I'm not saying that this is wrong. I'm saying that there is reasons for it and against it. For instance, treating real abstractions as reasons, or treating real abstractions as symptoms of the existence of a space of reasons. What are the arguments for it? In my point of view, the argument for it is, even Zonhattel says that much. Like, what was that there's a point in his text that he says, like, your dog cannot, exchange money for commodity. So it seems that, the abstract standard, there's an abstract standard there that has to do with the existence of a criteria for a certain set of behaviors. This is a good argument for it. At the same time, you're not just caused to act, like compulsively caused to act by the abstract, the real abstractions that are in place. This is a good argument for it being like a space of reasons. At the same time, it seems there is also a compulsory element to it, in the sense that it is something that emerged out of already an ongoing practice, right? That has causal efficiency, and you don't really need to treat it as a criteria, you just do it at the same time. So, for instance...
Yeah, but I mean, what I don't understand is, I don't think that the discussion was so obvious that both parties were agreeing that that distinction captures the relevant distinction. Like, there are two options here. Either we both accept the distinction between pattern ruled and pattern governed behavior and rule governed behavior, and then we ascribe phenomena in different ways. The other thing is to say that there might be something that doesn't really fall neatly on one side or the other.
Yeah,
which is more where I'm having hard time separating phenomena that way. Like, either things have reasons or they have causes. I'm not sure if I'm too...
It's not like that. Like, you being caused is a necessary condition to having a reason. The reason can be a cause to act as well, but it is not sufficient, right? You just having cause, by just being caused, you don't have a reason just by itself. The reason has something more than the cause. There is a certain type of a cause, a certain way. If a reason is a cause, like if your action is caused by a reason, the reason is there acting as a cause, but this doesn't mean that any cause is like a reason. So this is of course this has a certain grammar that has to do with a certain set of assumptions that has to do with Sellers, with Brandon. This is what make kind of this dialogue kind of difficult, because of course it means that we would have to engage more deeply with the arguments for this position, which is a position that I uphold personally. So I uphold a difference between causes and reasons, even though a reason can appear as a cause in a certain situation.
But can causes appear as reason?
Sorry?
Can causes also appear as reason?
If you use it, if there is a criterion of correctness that you use, so this is causing the behavior. So the reason, the criterion is a cause for your behavior.
No, but my point is the inverse. For example, the sort of, when DARPA does those crazy things with your brain, and it makes your hand move without you wanting, but then if you ask the person, but then you ask the person and they say, no, I wanted to move my hand because this and that. Like, I felt like there was a fly.
Connection. Yeah, the problem is you have to have an internal connection. This wouldn't be problem. If this was sufficient, this wouldn't be problematic. The fact that this is problematic is that you don't have an internal connection between the reason you are saying you moved your arm and the fact that you moved your arm. The fact is, you can have the behavior without being internally connected to the intention to raise your arm, for instance. So this is why this is kind of a problematic example for the concept of intentionality. Otherwise, this wouldn't be a problem at all, right? Like if you correlate a behavior with, I don't know, the purported intention of the person, and this would be the criteria. You treat this as a criterion of, you know, intending to do something, then there's no problem. You can just correlate things and you know, assign intentions. So this wouldn't be a problem. This is a problem precisely because you can't really assign an intention, even if the intention, the content of the intention is the same as what actually happened. So this is a very problematic example that you are using that can't be really the paradigm of what
No.
I'm
I'm just
saying.
trying. I just wanted to show that I was imagining
Yeah.
something that was inverse. But again, I'm really not committed in any profound sense. I from what you're saying, I don't remember ever suggesting that truth thinking or whatever has the structure of the dance of bees. Like in any case,
No. I won't go
like
that
so.
far.
Just to clarify, like
That's,
I don't think
no,
that's the
of course not. No, of course not. I'm not saying that.
yeah. So
I'm saying that in the absence of an account of thinking that kind of makes a difference between just having a complex pattern. For instance, you can have a super ultra complex pattern, physical pattern, without having any reasoning going on, right? I think, for instance, the Badiouian way of using thinking is kind of underdetermined in relationship to this difference. Like anything almost can be a kind of thinking. So I understand that
why anything?
there's a kind of instrumental use of thinking, and he's thinking about specifically things that we do, like art and science and politics and things like that. But at the same time, I don't really see like a more specific account of what is a thinking in there that would make would disambiguate between these different uses. You see, so there is a difference there. There is a difference of assumption. So this is why I wrote a bunch of notes last year about this issue of thinking in Badiou, because I wanted to see if, okay, can I make it, in a sense, make it clear for somebody with this assumption? Can I add my assumption of a difference between a pattern and a rule to truth procedure, and make it, in a sense, more clear to me, in a sense, what's going on? For instance, the idea, that you put forward in Freeing Thought from Thinkers, that the institution or the organization is thinking. I think this is the case, and this is what, in a sense, drew me to the circle early on. But I only uphold this assumption under the premise that there is a second moment in the procedure of the circle that meant that in which we did like what's the bilan in French, like we. Took our time to read what is the unfolding of the organization, even the unwanted consequences that are being brought forward by the organization. You see, it's not just having an organization of people and the thing moving. I think this is not sufficient to be a thinking. To be a thinking, you need to have like intentional relationship to the people that are part of the thing, even if the thing has causal efficacy that is not reducible to the intending results of the members. This is what's fascinating, right? Like you don't have to intend a certain effect. You are part of the organization. The organization, of course, does stuff. But the fact that the organization is doing stuff amounts to it being a thinking. Not sure about that. This is a problem. I think it becomes a thinking if you integrate it within a certain rule-obeying behavior, and you revise your rules and you revise your behaviors. So this is where I think there is a kind of a halt, right? That with me and Badiou, like with the Badiouian framework. So yeah, this is the main issue. And this is why I think, okay, the thing becomes a thinking when you say in your own paper that, okay, there's a point wherein we discuss the effects that the organization is having, And of course, there is a difference between that and also and the experience and experiment difference that you put forward also, which is quite striking. It's quite, this I uphold, I agree with that. Like experience might be like something familiar, and the experiment is when you test a certain regionalized entity, let's call it an entity like an organization, and see its effects. Like the experience tend to confirm our prejudices, the experiment not. Okay, but this is also, Lena, I am agreeing also with your book, this is an artificial, right? An artificial procedure that intends to bring forward effects that, you know, our prejudices might be incapable of bringing without, you know, these artifices. So I think you need to have this interplay in order to count something as really thinking. Otherwise, you have maybe a very complex pattern.
But the mark of the, so I mean, I can abdicate of the word thinking. I really don't give a shit. Like, it's not about that. It's about making explicit a certain process. And what I'm trying to understand is because there is a cluster of concepts that, for example, I don't see them in Girard anywhere. And I feel like they are in Reza, but not in Girard, which is and Luca Fraser is also very kind of up on the wall if she accepts this as she talks about, yeah, you can treat it as two agents, one asking questions, one answering, but that's a metaphor. Like the core concept is a certain type of partition or negation.
Yeah.
Which nothing tells you that you need to treat interaction there in this sort of intersubjective or multi-personal thing.
No, but you don't have to, but you can. You don't have to, but Reza shows that you can.
But that's a big difference, right, between you have to and you can.
No, but this doesn't comes from Reza though, right? Like it comes from Girard's own students, right? Like Alain Leconte and Miriam Quattrini and all these guys. Like, but I agree with you that I think that there's like a really interesting gap, and I think that this is like, it's still like not very formalized for me, but I think it's also like how I start to diverge from this, because I don't think that the thing, like the interaction, like it's not that it presupposes a community, but it is something about the structure of agreeing with others, right? Like I think that this like works way better as this sort of like not necessarily that you would think about this not in terms of like having to deploy across a community, although I think it makes tons of sense, but I think as being like collectively constructed, right? Like I think that this is where the thing works really well.
Yeah, I wouldn't go as far as constructing collectively. I mean, treating that as built-in Girard framework. Of course, I tend to agree with Gabriel that there is a kind of, you could treat it as a metaphor, but I don't think it's a metaphor either. I think there is a shift of,
well, both in the sense of like game semantics and dialogical logic. It's not really a metaphor, right?
I think
there's a whole research program that direction, right? The mathematics of dialogue, bias, rationality. I mean, it's a serious research program. I'm not saying that it's not. Just the thing that I wanted to get to that seems like it's, I mean, the vulgar sense of this, like perhaps I'm not really going beneath the surface here, that's why my questions are not very good, but vulgarly, I have the impression that we're not going to accept any idea of a novel formulation, a new statement that is not filtered through consciousness. Ultimately, like intentional behavior by a subject who says, this has been adopted as something that I ought to do.
No,
I'm not seeing how that has been dismantled. And the only way that this seems dismantled is because we're generalizing this as a property of language. So language is like this. Okay, but first you took the phenomenology of intentionality, then you generalize it. So it keeps the properties of
No, I don't think that's the way that it goes at all, actually. I don't think. You understand intentionality in terms of language and not the other way around. Language is the universal medium here. So this is why I'm not a phenomenologist.
Yeah, but I mean, you see, like I want a bit more before I accept that this is not a circular argument, because what it always leads to is in politics is statements of the form, okay, I cannot say that a political process like is the Commune of Paris, the Paris Commune is rethinking democracy. I need to say the people in the Paris Commune, insofar as they are part of the Paris Commune and they look back, they revise their behaviors based on what happened, and then they start adopting it as a reason, and that's when it becomes a rethinking of democracy.
No, I don't think they need to adopt it as a reason, but somebody has to adopt it as a reason. Doesn't mean that they need to adopt it as a reason. Like a historian can adopt it as a reason.
Well, that's a big difference. That's a big difference.
Sorry?
But that's a really big difference.
Yeah, there's a big difference, but nevertheless, you need somebody to see it as something. Like in the absence of somebody seeing the Paris Commune as something relevant to democracy, there's no relevance to democracy at all.
No relevance to Paris Commune.
Yeah, you need somebody to see it as this is the issue. Yeah, you need somebody to see it as fitting the history of democracy, for instance.
Okay, but how do you then call the process that happened in the Paris Commune? You wouldn't call it a complex behavior alone.
No, not at all.
It's something else. Yeah, but the reasoning that came later on from the historian saying, well, this is what we ought to do, came much later on. So at that part, when they are embedded in that process, it's not a complex pattern rule behavior, but it's not fully fledged rule of reason.
Yeah, but of course they are following rules in a sense. Of course they want things. They are plotting ways of getting what needs to be done. So this stuff is going on normally in a certain sense. Like of course it's a rupture in the political sense because it doesn't fit the current political scenario of the time, but nevertheless, infrastructurally, you have like a certain set of behaviors that does not decide finally upon the meaning of the Paris Commune. This is up for debate, really. This is up for debate historically and retroactively and all of that. But reconstruct the behavior.
Let's take this example. Like you have Paris, 1871. Just before, I don't know, March, right? February, you have the women starting to revolt. You have the first revolts there. The soldiers come with the guns. The guns are taken. That's, let's say, an action you can describe by saying you don't want to die in the hand of the gun, so you take the guns. Then they put up the barricades. That's not redoing democracy. That's just protecting yourself from more soldiers. Then, to keep the morale high, they write a little song. That's not reinventing democracy. That's just writing a little song. The sum of all those local investigations, they're all finite, all formulatable with well-known statements from the time. I want to survive. I don't want to let go. I want to raise the morale. I don't want to feel humiliated, therefore we will do this in an assembly rather than just have somebody tell me what to do. Those are all knowable statements, knowable rules. You can kind of filter that situation only with known rules. But the sum of all of that is irreducible to any of the known things.
Of course, the sum of all that, I agree.
Is it a rule behavior? If it cannot be followed because it cannot be expressed because it's a new thing that has no statement correlated to
it? Because the thing bringing it about, the behaviors are always behaviors, rational behaviors. I mean,
but
you don't need to postulate something ex nihilo, something weird.
No, but
to have an object.
Yeah. That's my point. The sum of all well-formed rules might not be a well-formed rule. right? The combination of all these things might amount to something.
No. It might not be a of course not, because otherwise you would only be capable of repeating known rules. The point is to come up with an account that is rule-based. At the same time, you can come up with novelty and revision of rules. Like this is the point really. The rule gives you explanatory traction upon behavior. Like you have rules, you can have explanatory traction upon behavior because of the rule. The rule is explanatory.
But my point is, for every behavior, there will be an individual or some set of individuals who are capable of saying we acted in accordance with this. I only wanted to survive. I only wanted to write a song. I just wanted to get the decision made.
Not always. Like, of course.
No, but even if we do, like, I'm simplifying just to make the case for rule-based explanation of the political phenomenon.
Yeah,
so taking to the extreme.
Yes. Yeah,
but then nothing guarantees that if I gather all of this together and I treat it as something that therefore is the correlate of an ought, that I will find someone acting with a particular person or any intentional being who will be able to say I acted in accordance with this.
You mean with a rule that you come up by extracting like the envelope of the situation, like everything, like the upper bound. Okay. Yeah. No, I don't think you have exactly that. You might have like you might say that the Russian Revolution is successful and there was somebody intending for it to be successful, not the Russian Revolution as we, for instance, use it today, because the concept has acquired many new meanings, many different collateral meanings, but you know, something like a complete uprising, you know, socialization of the means of production, at least in the first phase. Yeah, there were structural desiderata at the time that were kind of successful, right? Of course, then everything went kaput. But anyway, I mean, just to say, it's not always like that. You see, like very little examples. Like we have this. You were part of this. Like we have this discussion, organizational discussions in FOSO. Some of those discussions were oriented towards certain ideas. Like we had a certain set of ideas of what might be interesting to do. Certain other people were interested in doing something more in accordance with an anarchist, for instance, an anarchist model, let us call it, right? So it's not to say that the collective organization cannot appear as a reason for acting. No, it can appear as a reason for acting, and it can, and the experiment itself can appear as a reason for act. But the point is, you have a reason for act, right? So in the end, for instance, the experience that we had proved successful under a certain set of constraints, and I suppose would not be successful under a certain other set of constraints. And I think we can evaluate from what we did that these other set of constraints wouldn't be successful, maybe, of course, with a degree of uncertainty. So, for instance, I think this is the way I understand, for instance, participating in an event. What I like in Badiou's account of the event, and we taught this last semester, not the semester before that, is the fact that you are not sure what the event is while you're at it, but you are acting for your reasons, right? And I quite like the way he, for instance, portrayed the event as being guided by a trace, and the trace has typically, I think this is very striking to the way I would want to understand this kind of thing. The trace is a kind of, is always in the, can almost always be proposed in an imperative form. Like he says that much in Logics of World. But you don't really know what does that mean. You have to flesh out. You don't really know what it takes to make that imperative actual. and chances are that you won't be successful. You will achieve a different thing, probably. So I'm not saying this is, I'm saying all of that just to say it's not like a monotonic process where I have an intention and I'm part of the collective and the intention is brought about. No, it's not like that.
But I mean, you see how the
this
discussion
does not
is so...
exclude the fact that that you have kind of explanatory framework for the behaviors of everybody within the situation, even if you don't know what the event is, which means I can translate that into, I don't really know what the effects will be, and that will be retroactively integrated in the future as the advent of atonal music, as Paris Commune of 1848, or you name it, something like that.
I just don't see, I mean, with the exception of what you think should be called thinking or whatever. I mean, where was the pattern behavior being treated as a, like, where was the dance of the bees treated as something more than causality? I don't see, like...
No, it's not positively treated as that. It is the account that would flesh out what does it mean to have a thought, a thinking like that is absent. I'm not saying that it's positively present. I'm saying that it is absent. I need more to understand what is thinking. You see, this is my issue. I think it's defective in the sense that this is absent. I understand Badiou's point, pragmatic point about this, but for my own purposes, there is something absent in treating any, procedure as thinking. There's something defective about that. I need more than that.
Yeah,
so
I don't understand.
I don't think he's positively saying this, but it opens the way to say that, almost anything can think, which is an undesirable consequence of that assumption for me, at least. I'm not an animist of any sort or object-oriented or this kind of flat ontology kind of thing. I think it's an unfortunate consequence of our not having more fleshed out account of what constitutes thinking. So I have another set of reasons for not upholding that has to do with a certain undesired consequences of that.
The funny thing to me is that I would take him to be, on the contrary, too aristocratic, not too democratic with his idea of thinking, because not even humans think, right? In the Paris Commune, everyone knows to some extent what they're doing, but knowledge is not thinking for him. So before the Paris Commune, you can explain away, you can partition every set of actions in terms of finite descriptions. During the Paris Commune, if you take every person, you can also do it in that way, finite commitments and rules and norms, but none of them are in any sense, like, the best they can do is try to, let's say, incorporate or give some figure or give some partial statement about the process that they're part of. And you can,
I see what you mean. Like, you can't really attain infinity through the finite means of adding up to infinity. So the event is like the unattainable infinite, wherein you have like this finite.
No, the event is not infinite. It's not the event that is attainable infinite. The procedure, which is only intelligible as an infinite thing, and you get to, of course, treat it as a partial thing. But even a Maoist saying, I'm doing this because of Maoism, he's still doing it just to feel like he's cool or whatever. Dude, just nothing will make the distinction between, are you the guy trying to look cool as a revolutionary, or are you really in the spirit of the revolution? The question is you posed. And I would say that the whole point of having an ontology based on sets as the primitive is so that you can then, your theory of intelligence, so to speak, always assign intelligence or novelty to collective, when it comes to politics, to assign it to collective processes. And then there is the problem of bringing it back to your individual, intentional level, even if it's a condition that you need people who can follow rules, it's asking too much of your explanation of what is human intelligence, that the same mechanism that accounts for that also accounts for the Paris Commune. He actually, I think it's closer in some sense from what I understand of Pedro's position, because for him, it simply would never have been possible without some surrogate structure that is larger than what people have. People are weaker in terms of their capacity for reasoning, and that's fine. And combinations of that with other things, or combinations of that with other people, make up for that loss with weird strategies.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, but then the issue is that, for example, in Badiou, you don't get the distinction between pattern, rule, behavior, and rule govern, but you get the distinction between regularities in a world, which can be at the level of reasoning or at the level of causality, right? And singularity, which is a distinction more in the sense of when you account for something, do you account for it by saying that this is the law of how things are, and that's valid for reasoning as well, or do you account for it in terms of what this localized process is doing, right? If you need to point to a localized process, that's a better marker of what he's aiming at explaining than making the difference between these are just instantiations and these are rule following. Like you can have perfectly a cephalic rule following behavior that is just the law of something. So it kind of, perhaps those that added axes between regularity and singularity added with the pattern and the rule govern, it might help because, for example, you get law-like rule behavior, which is the law of social world. It's rule-based, but it's law-like.
Yeah, second nature in a sense. Yeah.
Yes, second nature-like, and you get singular and rule-based.
Yeah.
And that's what he wants to explain.
You know what's really weird is the fact that I'm using that exact chapter in order to supplement my Wittgensteinian account of change in my paper that I'm writing about Bento Prado Jr. So I'm totally on board with that.
Yeah, but my problem is if you associate too profoundly rule govern with law like,
I don't associate.
Yeah, but for me, Reza does. For example, it's language. So? Yeah, he gives you that let's not have a thick concept of sociality. We don't want to have sociality.
I don't understand that argument. I'm not going to really delve into that because I don't understand that argument, this particular argument.
That he makes.
Yeah, the substantive sociality thing.
I think his point is like, I don't want to say things like, reason is social. Therefore, when I acquire a concept, I'm in agreement. It's the.
No, I think that I think that the thing is that like people like him and Ray take Brandon's position to be like essentially liberal, right? Like that by like reason being a social process, like you would automatically. I think that this is like Brandon's position, although it might not be, but that like that. Society trends towards fairness or justice because we're all like rational beings, therefore like we progressively become in agreement with each other, and that would entail that we all see ourselves as equal and whatever. I think that like Reza, although he doesn't really construct it in like in a believable term, but I think I sort of get it. Is that like he wants to decouple these two arguments, right? Like he doesn't want to say that like this thing of like the sociality of reason is like it's like a formal condition, is not a substantial condition, right? Like I think that this is the distinction that he's trying to make, like the fact that like reason, in fact that to use like blue as a concept, we have to agree, but that doesn't mean that like we are in agreement when we are using reason. I think that this is sort of like the thing.
Yeah, but look, again, so my point is that from what I got from his structure is he's saying, look, when we get a model of logic itself, which is interactional, we moved away from the substantial, which presupposes sociality, and we turned it into an intrinsic
for
aspect.
sure.
Yeah, this much I get it.
But this is already problematic. This is already problematic. First, because you're not really undoing the substantial. You're just formalizing the substantial. You just said that interaction is...
No, but I mean, if I understand, building upon what Pedro said, if this is it, it seems to be something that, for instance, has to do with the difference between, the difference that I usually make between what's normality and normativity. For instance, like normality has to do with a certain set of contents of behaviors that are normal, that we agree upon. Normativity is an abstract property of having rule-based behavior. You can come up with different set of rules, but it's not fixed. Like the reference of these rules is not fixed, right? So this is the way I would parse this difference between substantive sociality and formal sociality, if this is what Reza means. But nevertheless, I don't agree that that Brandon does not presuppose a formal sociality, because, you know, even if maybe his account is too substantial, like maybe it's too normal, instead of being normative, right? But this does not mean that it is not also formal, because the way Brandon thinks about content conferring practices, it does not prejudge what those contents are specifically. It just has a model of multi-agent system that is, you know, and the deontic scorekeeping model. So I'm not sure. I mean, first, if that is it, I'm not sure that the critique that Reza makes is tenable to Brandon in that sense. Yeah, but maybe there are unwanted consequences of the way Brandon frames it.
But you see where I'm trying to get? Like, my point is, once we have those two axes of regularity and singularity, rule and pattern, the problem is, like, you don't want to define rules in such a way that they're too committed to regularity.
Yeah.
And for example, we would have to see in detail, and I think that this is a technical point, in which sense is duality and negation and testing in Girard, does it imply, like, the fact that, from what I understood thus far of his project, the fact that the set to be tested, right, and the set that does the testing, that they share the same universe, right? There must be a set that contains both of them. That's a condition. This is how much regularity does this imply? How much you can interpret this as some sort of common underlying whatever, right?
Yeah.
So that's the first issue.
Yeah, I agree. That's an issue. I agree with that. Yeah.
And I mean, it makes perfect sense if you want to expand on that. So if you have a research project based on the capacity for dialogue to lead to new places, to perfect reasoning and so on, that's a non-issue, because you will want to treat this universal, this universe as some level of commonality, and you want to treat tested and testing as two agents or two moments of an agent or whatever.
Yeah, like, whatever.
Try to unfold it.
You can treat that way. Yeah.
But the issue is, well, I want to be able to push it towards the singular a bit and see if it holds, right? In fact, I think that it's quite striking if you read a bit into the math, as far as I could go, that the way that he defines negation and this partitioning is ridiculously close to the formalism that defines an investigation for Badiou. It's really similar to the way that you take, like, this weird complements of either you get a positive or a negative, and you take a complement, then you build a tree out of these filters. Like, it's
like, you mean like the theory of points or something like that?
It's both in being an event and in the theory of points.
The theory of, I think the theory of points, something like that, yeah.
Because this sort of mix of, like what Girard is doing is finding a weird mixture of classic and intuitionist logic, right? He takes a weird notion of negation, which is quite clear cut, establishes this sort of polarities, dualism, and so on.
It seems to be, for me, this was unclear. It's a technical point too. It seems to me to be compatible with the classical negation, but at the same time, in the text, I'm reading that it does not behave like classical negation.
No,
like
it doesn't.
Cannot have an argument from what's argumento por absurdo, right? Like what's that in English? Oh, yeah.
Argument by contradiction, reasoning by
argument by contradiction. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but I think you should forget the classical logic. Like it's a classical operation in the sense that it's either it's here or it's there, right? Some statement is either is the proof of negation of A or is a proof of A. You just had those two things, but you use it to partition in a very sophisticated way a tree of proofs in such a way that you never move only within, let's say, proofs of A. You can only move, the only allowed moves is by letting the other then give a non-proof, right? So you have like inclusion, conjunction, envelope, you have all those operators, but they are, let's say, dual in the sense that, let's say, the statement that gives you the proof of A is A enveloped by its negation, enveloped by the negation of the negation. So it's like many of the elements are definitely, I mean, one of the first things Badiou said when he published Being an Event was, I just gave a situated account of Hegel's logic. Like, you want to talk about double negation, dialectics, and so on? Yeah, it's just that it's a situated singular phenomena. It's not the law of the world. Like, it needs to begin, it needs to have a start. His project was always very much connected with that idea that the outer description is generic because it's all about, let's say, coming up with statements that are not, don't really appear in the language of the situation, are not consequential in the language of the situation. But internally, it's a dialectical process. Like you get most of Hegel back. And formally, you get a similar feel with the idea of these investigations. They can give you a positive or a negative result. Then you construct the trees of these positive and negative connections, and the complement structure of them gives you some important information. He even describes it as putting the classical negation at the service of contradiction, right? So there is a lot of similarities, a lot. They could be definitely studied. But what he's suggesting, and this is why I push towards this interpretation, is that you can bring together singularity and normativity. You don't need to have normativity with regularity. But when you have singularity with normativity, you cannot make statements of the form, they are not proper statements of the form, I thought. Those are possible, but they are of the regular plus normative type. Because when I think, a bunch of agreements with others must hold. But when it thinks, or something is thinking, that those are not necessary, because that interaction is between, let's say, you and the organization, or you and the painting, or paintings amongst themselves, or whatever. So it's slightly more deformed, it's slightly less trivial in that sense. It's not yet another case.
In Girard and Badiou, or both?
Badiou, yeah. So my interest in, like, the place where I see an interesting intersection between what you're saying, the way I understood Pedro's research, which seems to give more credence to the role of other material substrates in the development of these processes. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, Pedro, but I had the impression from some of the stuff that you were interested in that you take Wilson's kind of weak rationality, like we are weaker at reasoning than it seems, right? and this avoidance strategies, not to drive us towards a social theory, but let's say a media theory, right? In the sense that
for sure, definitely.
It's more localized than sociality. We're weak, but in our agreement as the human intelligence, it works. It's different from saying it's weak, but with a bit of paint and some screen,
like paper or whatever.
Yeah, some paper, it works. Like, you don't need to go to give, like, that would be the regular description, and it might be fine as well, but it doesn't really end the problem. You still want to know, in further restricted structures where you have these weak reasoning capacities and some material support that does not think on its own, if it's possible that something else happens. And I would say that you take these three levels, from sociality at large to some medium, I would put the generic procedure in a bottom, where it's not simply that you have a medium that spells out complexities that simply wouldn't fit your reasoning capacities, but that when it takes this detour, it takes it in such a way that it inverts the statement. Like, the statement that makes the process intelligible requires you to say something thinks and not you think. So you could consider it as a restriction, like sociality in general, reasoning with supports, and the point where the supports are of such a special quality that you're the support, ultimately. Doesn't mean that you can avoid. I mean, I've never seen anybody and claim, well, there is art, politics, love, science, and there is bees. Like, it's still, everyone complains it's humanistic and so on, but it's weirdly, it proposes that you need to invert the order. You get humans as the support and something else as the thing reasoning. Like, that's the only way where grammatically you can make sense of what's going on. Like, the statements start making sense. So I see kind of a continuity, and I actually see, like, it's funny because we said this a couple of months ago, like, it seems like a lot of pragmatic studies of reason, they fit into Badiou's project at the post-evental level. They don't fit as the general theory, but for him, there is no general theory. Like, there is no, even though every thinking emerges singularly, with time it becomes regular, right? And then you can have a whole process to describe this. How does it come that a new idea becomes sort of parsed into well-formed behaviors and just absorbed back? That's an interesting field to study. But when you generalize this as if it's not a singular but a general process, these material mediums, these sort of weird inversions, they don't have a place anymore. Like, you never get to ask about these things, which I think is something that bothers Pedro a bit when it's presented too much as a general account, you know? I'm not sure if I'm giving up, like, if it makes sense to you, Pedro. Perhaps.
No, I'm like, I don't understand Badiou enough, because, like, for me at least, the thing is that, like, and I think that's like, I have to go to the text that you mentioned just today, the transcendental syntax one, but, like, for me is that, like, you can't really explain anything if it's not in like strictly naturalistic terms, right? Like, and I think that, like, what, like, Girard by way of Mark Wilson gives, like, a good, like, intuition of, like, how
you're breaking, Pedro.
You broke up, man.
Yeah, you're muted. I don't know what happened. Not listening, not getting anything.
And but while Pedro is coming back, now you're back.
No, you're back. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I think about it's just natural language. I didn't get if that's like a
no. What I said was that, like, I think that for me it's like that, like, I don't understand enough of Badiou, but I don't, like, I never get the appeal of the more generic thing of, like, this inversion that you mentioned on the bottom. like because I just don't understand it, like I just don't know enough of it to sort of make a sense, but like that, you know, like my thing is like really, because I think the insight that is like, that I think it's like really powerful in Sellers is like being like really strongly normativist and really strongly naturalist, and how one presupposes the other when you take science as the sort of like starting point of all of this, right? Like, and I think that what Girard does, and I don't know like how compatible it is with what Badiou is saying, but I'll have a look at the text later. It's just that like it gives like good intuition, like formal intuition. And I think I didn't really get, why do you think that Reza's move, which is not really his move, but just let's say that it's his, of like conflating the formal interaction stuff with the social interaction stuff, as like, why is the formal not a good answer to the social problem? But in a certain sense, I think it's like how these like ampliative computational strategies that, you know, Bardoni and Lorenzo Magnani talk about a lot about, that actually come from game semantics in the first place via John Woods and Dov Gabay, are like really good intuition for this sort of like computational expansion, let's say like the Cambrian explosion of like minds and shit like that. But
well, I can answer that quite easily, because I mean, the bibliography you suggested me on these things, I think it's amazing, and I think it makes a lot of stuff intelligible about like a concrete pragmatic theory of shared reasoning. I'm all for that.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't like when it's let's say proof of intelligibility for some phenomena is taken for, let's say, a key to reason in general, because whatever theory of reason comes up as a general theory, I want it to include what happens in political organizations.
No, I see what you mean. Like,
I don't want to claim that generic, and I don't think Badiou claims that these things are the source of everything we should call reasoning. That's why he doesn't even use the word.
No,
right? But
I understand what you say
give me
now
as a
in other
general-
terms, though.
Sorry?
Is that like, if you have like a transcendental, like, you know, this sort of like because Reza towards the end of the chapter says like, oh, but this is a transcendental argument about like the formal conditions for the production of intelligibility. Okay, then like if you say stuff like that, then you have to have like a really good argument for like why does something like an organization doesn't think. But I think that this is, you know, like I think that this is like a thing that, like, because if you're saying that like, well, if we can infer, let's say, I don't know if you would use this word, but like if we can infer some sort of like goal-oriented structured behavior by like abstract entities, why can't we say that they think? Or why can't we model them or consider them as thinking in the same sense as us? And like I think it's just like, I just don't agree with Reza in that sense. Like I don't think that he's doing a transcendental argument. Like I think that he tries to move away from Carnap, or being like the logical structure of language, which I think it's actually the much more credible argument in that sense of, especially in terms of like considering ludics and Wilson and all of this stuff. Like I think it fits quite nicely, especially with the Italian guys. Like it's really very like, I think it's really well interlocked.
Pedro, I'm a bit lost. Who fits nicely? Is Reza or who fits nicely?
No, Carnap. The stuff about like naturalizing the transcendental via the logical structure of language.
Okay.
Or the conditions for the intersubjective understanding. I think what he gets from like Frege and Wittgenstein, right? I think that this makes way more sense in terms of, and this is why I think the chapter is really weird, actually, is that if you accept this Carnapian perspective, like you have a much better use of like Girard and Japaridze and the formal theories of interaction.
I didn't understand, where do you think Reza departs from Carnap?
Because he's trying to make a transcendental argument for like the overall conditions of production of intelligibility, you know, like this sort of like this generic, the AGI thing, like the general, I think it's very like I sort of understand what he means, but not quite.
Yeah,
Or I don't agree with it actually.
Yeah,
But
perhaps,
just to finish this, because I think that this is and this is where I think that like I get Gabriel's concern with this, is that like, well, if you have like very, if you want to have like really broad accounts of reason, or like quote unquote, not really, but transcendental psychology, like you have to like bring this other stuff into it. But like personally, and I think that like for my work, it doesn't come from there, it comes from a different place, and I think that, which is like very underexplored, but it's much more through like, because when Gabriel said like a philosophy of media, like I think it's more a philosophy of technology. And I think that like by sort of like building up technology through this, you get like fully naturalized, and like you get a better sense of like why is this, and thinking technology in like very ample terms of like social, like governability as technology, so on and so forth. You get like better, you have like, I think in my mind at least, you have like a better shot at arriving at precisely the question that Gabriel's outlining as problematic in Reza's account.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I have more easier time with what the way you described it to me than the way that I read straight from Reza. Though I'm definitely not clear if I got it the right picture, so I'm probably arguing against a scarecrow. But the underlying thing that leads me to think that this is not so scarecrowy as it looks actually goes back to Hegel, because you know the guy who is behind all of this literally deduces the relation between understanding and reason out of love. It's the passion of the Christ. That's, I mean, it's the embarrassing thing. The critique of representation comes from a singular description. The theory of the problems of following norms emptily comes from the French Revolution. Like, even in Hegel, you don't, like, there is a very strong sense of disruption, which is, in my opinion, much more, it's very hard to reduce it to revision. I feel like the Hegel for the revision of rules, like the only singular thing you get is kind of singular breaks in reasoning and revisions that capture it again under certain conditions. That's, let's say, in our axis here between pattern, ruled, and regular, and Hegel only exists kind of in this block, or regularity. And there is singularity and these weird disruptions of ruins of states, disruptions in political and other affairs. And I feel like it's not for nothing that Marxism was so interested in Hegel, because negativity, the negativity you want is not just the negativity of error, it's the negativity of self-sundering, right? The sense of everything comes down. And then Hegel is a weird absolute material idealist, in the sense that when a state comes to ruin and you don't even have the means to continue, the ruins have a form, right? Ruins are something you can do something with. And the things you can do with the ruins of a state are not given by the state, and they're weirdly contingent, right? They're weirdly non-continuous, let's say. And I feel like this is a very important point that gets ultimately the sort of becomes a logical figure in Badiou, with this sort of idea that below the site you can still extract some form that didn't have a form, but that doesn't mean you will continue. It's not a revision of a world. A new world is not the expansion of the old world. It's not more intelligibility. It might imply absolute destruction.
Yeah, but revision does not imply either more intelligibility.
Yeah, but you see, like, when sociality is always on the side of regularity, normativity, at least from afar, where I am, like far away from the actual nitty-gritty of the project, looks so kind of entangled with agreement, general raising of intelligibility, universality.
I think that's a problem. Yeah, general raising of intelligibility is a problem with the Razas project, but I think this comes up in the last chapter, in the philosophy of intelligence.
Yeah, it appears there, but I felt like it was.
He wants to weave the whole project that was, in a sense, the heart of the project is a very much more modest thing that is the Twain model. What does it need to be intelligent? And there is this methodological explicit stance that, okay, we will model this intelligence upon ourselves. Of course, there is the human is a model for intelligence, right? But the fact that you are trying to parse what does it mean to instantiate or to equip something else with this form of intelligence means that you are also upholding the thesis of multiple realizability. Like you can, I mean, prima facie, you can instantiate this in different substrates. So this is the basic gist of the book. And then you have transcendental psychology, you need perception, you need time, you need blah, 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 and then you need language. So in the context of the book, I think this is very striking in this chapter because like he can, from what I understand, which is not, it's not, admittedly not fine-grained enough. I need to really go through Alain Leconte's book and James Trafford's book to see if this is the case. From what I understand, he takes from ludics this minimal idea that with just a place, the loci, right? With the place and the iteration of that place and the functional this iteration will individualize a certain function for that place, you get semantics. This is basically the minimal understanding I have of it. And I think it's pretty striking. I think it's very good, really. And I think it captures something, some formal component of, a possible reduction of semantics to a syntax in the sense of having like strings of symbols and meaning emerging upon those strings of symbols.
But this is the crazy thing.
For that, you need those kind of that maybe you can have different strategies, but the dialogical strategies is very striking in that sense because you have to have like kind of an independent stance, like two independent stances in order to have like individuation of the trace that will count as something else. Then you have semantics in a sense, like minimal semantics.
Yeah, but my point is this, like, the way that this, look, there is a very important part that I still didn't understand. I'm not sure if we have time, if you guys already know a bit of this. Like I wrote down most of what I understood, like step by step of what orthogonality means.
Yeah, I'm fucked with that. It's very clear.
But besides the technical point of the way that the proof trees are partitioned between who defends and who attacks, or who's tested and who tests, like if there is such a singular way that this needs to behave, taking that in like bracketing that for a bit, because I still don't get it. Like, the whole point of this sort of specific description that Badiou gives of how inquiries amount to some form of generic supplement of a situation. The way that he describes this is as the construction of a subject language, right? The whole point being that what counts as a subject, meaning the thing to which you would address the singularity of, this is the thing that this concerns, right? This is the subject matter, is not the stuff that was in the situation. So you would either say a couple, you would say an organization, you would say an artistic movement, but you're missing some information and you're making poorer statements if you make the statement about just one painting, like if you listen to one noise track and you make statements about it, you'll make poorer statements.
Yeah, but I
if you
agree
listen
with everything you're saying. I don't
yeah,
see
so my point is, I
what's the
don't
problem.
see like where any of this is, you know, contradictory. On the contrary, I find it very supportive of, you know, the task of spelling out what it means locally construct a certain semantic space where there was none, and in a way that is irreducible to what was before. I mean, the idea that this happens through testing experimentally, locally, I also find that quite. What I don't get is, and I think that that's the part that I don't get is why is the way that this seems to be accounted by, like, it seems like there's a strategy that I find a bit weird, which is, let's take this otherwise situated structure, let's treat it as a general structure, and now, of course, there is not even a place to ask the question, how does this come about from a regular, like, this becomes a regular structure itself. Every reasoning is this development of new statements out of some situation. And then, of course, once you generalize it.
Just a quick point about this. I don't think this is the argument of the chapter, like every novelty. I think the argument of the chapter is just to bridge syntax and semantics and make, you know, make a transcendental account of the emergence of natural language out of that. It's not just any.
No, yeah, I'm not arguing with Reza. I'm arguing with the way that you presented it, like, okay. Because my interest is understanding how I can help with the research you guys are interested, and I can find a common ground. For now, I can find a common ground between what I understand that you and Pedro are doing and what interests me in the fact that there are formal similarities between linear logic and ludics, and perhaps a refined, a more specific account of a process that is underdetermined in post-evental subject languages, or whatever you want to call it.
I will have to look very detailed, in much more detail, the issue of subject language, because it seems that maybe that's a candidate for bridging this issue.
But you see, like, my point is, at this technical level, I see a lot of things I want to understand better. I'd be happy to kind of try to chew the part I understood and contribute presenting. The place where I see a problem is not with, is this something worth developing or not? The place where I see a bigger contradiction is that, from my impression, there is, between Pedro and you, and what I think Dennis and I are trying to do, for example, we wrote a text that manages to describe some form of logic of value and other aspects of what makes phenomena intelligible socially. And we are trying to develop, let's say, a singular, the logic of what a singular set of organizations or a singular ecology, something which is not, it might have necessary conditions on, well, it's not a text written for aliens or for bees, it's written for people who are doing politics. So it's definitely filled with presuppositions on what it's for. It's for humans, right? And modern contemporary people, whatever. So it's filled with subconditions, of course. But ultimately, it's asking questions of the form, given that the social space is more intelligible if you look at it through this lens of value here, through the lens of kinship, through the lens of contracts or whatever. What are interesting things we can say about organizing that are helpful? So it's a situated thing, more on the side of the singular, right? If you try to test out some stuff, how would you go about it, and how you might look at your own organization in a way that you maximize what you learn from it? Given that it's a very underdetermined thing, we don't know how you're going to do things, we don't know what you're going to do them for, but how can we still say some things that are useful for those conditions? So I feel like we're moving towards something which is quite localized, situated, and building from smaller blocks, giving those kind of parameters of value, blah, 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 right? the place where I find it hard to create some sort of compatibility is, for example, Pedro just said something like governability is a technology. Reasoning happening through technology, therefore governability is also technology. It's something that is always already happening. It's never truly, it's more situated than sociality in an abstract sense, but it's still, like, there is no discontinuity. It's a sort of, you know, I feel like sometimes pragmatics hides a certain, a more profound level of uncertainty below a sort of real worldness. Like, I'm so starting from the real world, I'm starting from such a kind of no illusions account of the world, that the fact that when you try something new, it's even less than that, right? When you're trying something new, you don't feel like you're in the world, you feel like you're a bit out of it in a weird way. Like, it's even less grounded than continuing what's there. So sometimes that feels hidden behind it a bit for me, and I seem to feel like most of the time that we clash, it's because there is too much of a, like, the way in which things are argued, because perhaps it has a concern with the genetic account or the morphological account of things, is too based on the continuity of processes. There is no way of starting something, because we're always talking about what continues, what is essential, and not about what is not essential. Whereas in some level, organizing is not essential. And other stuff about other procedures is also, they're not essential. You can not do it. It's not necessary. It doesn't follow from the way that things are, that they should, that we should do this or that. It's precisely.
Actually, I would argue the opposite, that organization is essential.
Dude, don't say that. Like, it's so hypocritical. It's crazy. Don't say that, man. I mean, look at us. We're doing shit. Like, no.
No, I mean, like, no. Of course it is, but like, what does it actually? I mean, but that's also like, okay, organization.
Like, with one more step, you're gonna say that we are already always organized, and like.
No, of course not. But like, it's just that, like, we depend on organizational structures for everything. Like, the fact that, like, we're like having, you know, like.
But again, you
right?
don't
like,
want. Again, you don't want to be through that very obvious, important statement, hide the fact that there is a difference between the regular organizations and trying something out, which is singular. Like, whatever it is.
But do you think that this is like but this is not like an organizational, like, do you think that this is an organizational difference
as well
between these two things?
Yes. Yeah, it's I mean,
well, it can be, but it's maybe not necessarily, I guess. Like, part of
I just want to clarify that you see the rhetorical trap, right? Which I think it's also a political trap ultimately, because do I disagree with your remark that everything we're always organized? Of course we are organized and we depend.
No, I didn't say they were always already organized, but no, like, but I understand what you mean. Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course we are.
Yeah, but you want to be able to say that and also account for the sort of ruinous problem of getting something off the ground.
No, of course. Like,
and in that case, you want to be able. It seems to me that you want to be able to make a sort of. Again, formally, it's all the same. Yeah, I mean, for Bogdanov, everything is organization, or for Badiou, yeah, everything is fucking sets or situations or parts of worlds. Yeah, you're not gonna build something out of nothing. You're gonna build with whatever is there. But you wanna be able to name explicitly that moment, which is what I mentioned in Hegel as well, a moment that it's much more intelligible if you describe it as a discontinuity than if you describe it as a continuity. If you allow for the moment where there is reason, but there is no ought, right? And that's where, for Hegel, you move, in fact, from understanding to reason. So it should be a place, it might be totally kind of heuristic. Like, can you you see my point? Like, can you describe the movement of the students in Brazil as a continuity? You can. You will learn less.
Yeah, I think another way that we could productively extend this is saying that there's a certain resolution at which the notion of failure becomes relevant. If you look at simply organization, at the organizational level, everything is organized, or at levels of disorganization or organization, you don't have a notion of failure. You only have a notion of degrees of some measure, which I think, but the whole concept of something moving towards a goal and failing to reach that goal, that seems to require an additional step, which is like something like the gap within organization between work and entropy, maybe, or between experiment and the result of the experiment, let's say.
But I also think that that's where Badiou and for example, Zizek and other Hegelians shift, right? Because for Zizek, usually these figures of a sort of rational suspension of the ought are in the future. They are like, you do something, then something happens that is bad, and the whole point is including negativity into the picture, so you see that failure also gives information, right, or gives structure. Yeah. For Badiou is the inverse, like, or it's expanded. He says you would never turn failure into a form had you not first adopted some new normative criteria, which is singular.
Yeah.
Right. So
in order to see.
That's why he criticizes Zizek. He says Zizek is actually a post-Soviet communist, meaning he has a fidelity to the idea that you can learn from the Soviet failure because it happened. And then he applies this even where there is no reason to do, like no regular reason to do. But you can only account for the capacity to turn a failure into a form locally, because there is a specific concrete hypothesis. It's not just the general logic of thinking, which turned that into a possibility. And people who can do that for certain phenomena cannot do for other. Right? So it's what you're saying plus this sort of, you need both moments, right? The capacity to turn a failed musical experiment into something that actually continues something, with the fact that that musical experiment is ultimately already grounded on something that wasn't a regularity to begin with. You see my point?
Yeah. But I mean, yeah, exactly. You have failing to be regular, and then you have the second moment of that failure indicating some other form.
Well, this is Zizek. This is what Gabriel is saying, that Zizek is saying. The other is different.
Creating the hypothesis and then showing that something failed there.
Yeah, I would say even, I think the hypothesis is already secondary, right? The idea is you need to have a site where you already have something which is, let's say, an available form that is there, but it has no application, right? And you can only give forms to things that didn't have form in a localized historical way, not in general. There is no general capacity to give form to things that have no form. There is the capacity to, following some assumption, do that for some phenomenon, right? So that assumption is this process of going from the site, which has something that has no form, to maintaining that it does, which is this weird localized imperative or this sort of emergent norm or whatever you want to call it. And then there is the capacity to follow a rule where from the outside it seems like there is no rule, right? Yeah. So that's why he says that situating Hegelian logic. Like, he accepts what Zizek is saying. He just says that it's more materially based and locally grounded than the general law of everything.
I have a problem exactly localizing this. Like, let's go back to our theory of points presentation. Like, the example that Badiou uses is like Schoenberg. Schoenberg is he surpasses the limits of tonality. So Schoenberg, if anybody that's a little bit literate in Western classical music in the 20th century, Schoenberg is the name of the guy that destroyed music and all that. Okay, but the way he did it, like the fact is that Schoenberg thought of himself as pursuing the consequences of what Mahler did or what other people did. He was thinking, okay, tonality is so stretched by now that somebody has to do this. Like, this is the next step because there's no harmonic function anymore going on here. So I mean, it is very easy to see Schoenberg as this guy with a hypothesis that breaks with everything, but it is actually easier to see him as this guy from outside. If you go very intimately within and see his procedure, he was thinking himself as pursuing the Germanic musical tradition, which is weird.
But I don't see the problem with that. Like, I mean, you take what's happening today in politics. Like, you don't need to go very far. Like the Seco Cezola guys in Colombia developing a cooperative. If you read their texts, they are saying that they're just continuing the tradition of Latin American politics and blah, blah, blah. But if you look at what is done with that motto in mind, it's unheard. There's never been such a huge cooperative structure with 40,000 people engaged in it. And I mean,
let me ask you something. Can you want the new into being? Will the new into being?
I don't know. There's no, I don't know why we would want to make a philosophical statement about how things can come into being. It's totally contradictory.
It's at stake in the discussion. This is why I'm discussing this. This seems to be at stake in the difference that you are putting forward between Zizek and Badiou, in a sense.
No, because I mean, so we use this idea like to make it easier to understand, like hypotheses, in the sense that it's a way to shift the discussion from enlightenment by some miracle to a more humble way of talking about seeing what holds, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but seeing what holds doesn't mean that the procedure that defined this needs to appear in one way. Like, I had a big idea, or I have a revolutionary kind of motivation.
From what I understood, there is a difference between Badiou and Zizek. Can you state again the difference?
The difference is that for Zizek, there is an ontological reason, because the subject is an ontological category. There is an ontological transcendental reason why any failure is caught up in new determination. Okay. Right? So for him, the big difficulty is explaining indifferent failures that go nowhere, like Malabou talks about, right? For Badiou, the way to explain that, to account both for indifferent failure and for the Hegelian failure, is to localize that within a situated procedure. Like, well, if you're, I don't know, involved in a political struggle where people's suffering is a serious matter, the moment that process fails in terms of people are suffering with it, or for example, the moment that equality is an important thing and the party becomes unequal and fails, that can be a relevant information for a further revolution, like happened with the Cultural Revolution, sending party intellectuals. Does that mean that you're, with those assumptions, capable of turning any failure into form begetting process? No, only that. You won't necessarily make scientific advancements.
But nevertheless, there is. I mean, there is strong singularity. There is a formal treatment of this, like that, you know, whenever it obtains, it obtains.
Yeah, but this is the, for me, this is the part that the guy got it really good, and that's why I don't really buy the critique that it's too vague. It's not vague. It's
I
purposefully
don't think it's
underdetermined.
vague. Who says it's vague?
Like, for example, you know, it's not enough to flesh out the way we want our concepts to be like. When he talks about thinking, I want more than what he's saying.
But this is not because it's vague. It's because there is something missing that would make it's a very specific. It's a very,
yeah. But I'm just saying that,
specific,
for example, for something
requirement.
like what he calls a subjective process to obtain, the class of heterogeneous structures that can instantiate it are bizarrely different amongst each other. Like it's a much weaker level at which you can consistently and responsibly formalize these things and still leave a lot of room. So the room is part of the benefits of this approach, right? You don't want to say what type of agents, what type of interaction, what type of structure to give consistency to something is required, because you want that to be part of the thing that is fleshed out.
No, I understand the rationale behind it. I understand, but
so the good part of it is that even though it's so underdetermined, it still gives you some statements that are quite strong, like the statement that what Zizek treats as an ontological feature is for Badiou a situated feature. It might not obtain. It might be the case that failures don't lead anywhere. It might be the case that the sum of individual inquiries is just the set of those inquiries. It doesn't capture anything more than these finite bits of information, right? So not only does he give the option that there is no such thing happening, but he also limits the reach when it does happen. When it happens, okay, it does something with these parameters here in this kind of context here. It has very heroic qualities, but it's still situated and so on. So that's why I was saying, like, just to go back to the previous discussion, that this sort of discontinuity, this sort of, I find it, of course, for a long time, I also wanted to give it a positive content in the sense of, therefore, it's miraculous, therefore, it's heroic, therefore, it's kind of a willing into being, because those are the images I have in mind. But it's funny to see that it works the same. It's still the same sort of description he would give, even if you come up with a very, 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 very different idea, where there was a fixed marriage by some family. Now you're partnered up with a person because of it was willed by two people who don't see anything singular into it. And it develops into something that is a very loving couple with something that is only concerns the two of them. Even if it is the hatred for their parents, God knows. Like, it's something that will require you to turn to those people with those names and that specific history and say, this is happening here and nowhere else. And they're doing their thing, right? So it can take totally kind of continuist presentations. I don't think that's a problem, but we do want it to also allow for these other things. So the thing that the specific point where I have a hard time sometimes bridging how I see next interesting steps in the research that formally and technically are very close to things that interest you and Pedro is actually the sort of grammar in which things are organized. It seems to me like I should be saying something to make more sense to you guys. I should be saying something like, well, we know that people communicate, reason, and behave in this way. Therefore, if you want to propose a communist project, it should continue expanding those characteristics.
No, I don't agree with that at all, actually. This would be.
But I just want to say that that's how
if you said something like that, I would find you an idiot. Actually.
Yeah, but sometimes I am. I don't know. Like my point is not that. Like it might be full. I might be fully not comprehending what you're proposing, but the fact that it arrives at me sounding like that a bit.
We are talking past each other. Like it's very hard. The problem is, I agree with everything you say. At the same time, there is a mismatch. So it's that we are talking past each other. Like the levels of investigation are different. I think the fundamental problems are different, but there is a crossing somewhere that makes this interesting for me. I read your book. I find there many things that interest me there that I can use. Actually, we can discuss this in another occasion. I said to you, like I don't really know much about Lacan. I have this there's this difficulty because it's a pretty technical book for the Lacanian field, but there is a nevertheless certain forms of thinking there going on that interest me. I think I agree with much of it, some of it not, but much of it yes. So there is something, yeah, it requires work. There is something there in common there, but we are talking past each other. I don't think any stuff that we are doing, that I am doing, and the stuff that I take Pedro is doing, entails that we have to convince conscious people because they behave like this and that. This is all too empirical. This account of rationality is a transcendental account of rationality. And the idea is exactly to evict the necessity of direct reference. In the philosophy of language, this is the point. Like you don't, language does not work by labeling. It's not labeling. Like you don't have the object and the name for the object. You have like a process, a generative process that needs several agents in order to make emerge a certain order that will kind of make such labels obtain and in a certain sense be there, like, and we can take it as it comes and say, oh, this is the name of a teacup. I have a teacup here. This is the name of the teacup. But yeah, this was the internal purpose of this kind of inferentialist account. So there's this issue, which is a foundational issue in the philosophy of language, and there is also this kind of argument about, our picture of the human being a kind of fictional model, like we are kind of postulating these thoughts by modeling them upon overt speech. This is a very, very interesting Salesian argument as well. And there are several features of this account that are pretty interesting. Like it's a rich, complex account that leaves a bunch of gaps in the sense of things that mediate each other. Like if you compare that to Kripke, which I know you know because you quoted in your book as well, naming a necessity, it's much simplified. The analytic metaphysicians, they like it because you can manipulate the possible world semantics, but you need rigid designators and all that. And these are not plausible for me. And I think Sellers' account is compatible with naturalism, which is something that I agree with Pedro, like it's something important to me. But at the same time, it's a transcendental naturalism because it's not just empirical stuff going on. These empirical stuff, in order for us to have traction upon them, we need like explanatory resources. Like they make structures implicit, explicit. You see, implicit structure is explicit. So these are I'm just freestyling here because this is kind of the internal motivation that I have to go for sellers, to go for this kind of thing.
No, I get it. But for example, just to see how you would take this, like how would you develop it? Because like I understood that the first kind of political kind of Rosetta Stone we found was that text by Evans, because he gives a sort of, tries to translate kind of Marxist political problem to a more sophisticated philosophy of language issue. Like, and I think his strategy is to say, we can think, if we treat capital as a space of reasons, then we can talk about political action, political analysis in terms of an expansion or enrichment. So I think that's kind of how he translated it, right?
Yeah,
first try to account for value or whatever in terms of reasons, and then he tried to say, well, but it's an impoverished world because justification for things are pretty much monetary in the end, even if it's a simplified world, right? Taking a bunch of richness of the world out, what's left out is the fact that a language that renders intelligible most justifications is a language about, I'm cutting corners, this is cheap, that's too expensive for me, I need this to work tomorrow, things like this. And he's saying that this is, let's say, a proof of the poverty of capital, right? And saying, well, then this opens up to something else, which is now articulatable in the same language, which would be something, if I understand correctly, like an enrichment of the space of reasons, right?
There's something fishy on that for me, but okay, yeah, I think
like
this is
the most generous interpretation I can give that is saying, look, guys, I'm describing not what constitutes, nor what can be done. I'm just saying that a good evaluation of if something changed is that I get capitalism as an impoverished world where most justifications are reducible to this commodity reasoning, and a better world, more emancipated world, would have a richer reasoning, social reasoning logic. So there you go. I gave you a measure for, did we get a better,
like a measure of evaluation? Okay, maybe that's a way to go.
Yeah, maybe that would be like a generous description of it. Though it seems to me that it like a lot of the machinery that interests you and Pedro is kind of put aside, because there is nothing is generative there. You just you get to compare two static frames, but you don't get to pass from one to the other.
You're comparing the expressive richness of one language to the expressive richness of another language.
Yeah, something like that, right? So I imagine that makes it sound fishy, because it sounds like it's much weaker than the ways you guys approach it, right? But I mean, even if I take that, I mean, I find it useful in the sense that I don't think that I have a big problem imagining a way of let's say, writing an appendix to the whole thing we worked on, the primer, giving you the sort of, okay, some propositions hold in this world and some propositions don't hold.
No.
And the propositions that hold will look like this impoverished capitalist space of reason.
This is my way of approaching, I mean, of bridging this kind of language-based thing in the primer. I don't have a problem with that. This is why I was interested in studying Gianotti, because he makes, I mean, it's fallible. It's an abandoned project. He abandoned it. I mean, in certa herança marxista, he doesn't want to deal with it. But between Trabalho de Reflexão and Apresentação do Mundo, there was this interesting interplay between, language games, which has to do with, the forms of life themselves, and the operational scheme. And he tries at least to explain the emergence of commodity form through the operational scheme. That is a kind of a subset of the subset of which is language games, non-verbal language games, something like that.
I see the connection. I could definitely see that being developed. But then imagine this, right? So you have this sort of transcendental description of a social world. Again, it has huge preconditions, which definitely include, they should be compatible with the development of the human mind, for example, right? But given that we're not addressing that, we're addressing politics, you have this social transcendental description, you have the sort of restriction it imposes on, let's say, language games that are felicitous, right, that obtain. but then my problem is, would you guys see a way of, with this kind of description, move towards, statements about, well, if you try messing with this world in weird ways, these are good things to keep in mind, like, or these are possible consequences, or because right now we are imagining the same thing at the level of organization.
You are in an explanatory framework. Like you have this explanatory framework that embeds, commodity form into a certain idea of forms of life that has to do with language games. So this is an explanatory framework. Okay.
Yeah.
So you are asking if you can, if it's transformative, you can transform it into something else, something like that. Like you can.
Yeah, perhaps, or if we should imagine that transformation is happening on this other level, right?
Yeah.
Because, for example, the sort of thing that I think we can do the way that we're doing, we can ask weird questions like, let us say that given some weird state or weird situation composed of this multi-layered transcendental, such as, for example, I don't know which state Black Lives Matter started with the big riots, but some...
Yeah. This is the statement. Yeah, Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, but I don't know which state it was, like actual place.
Yeah, which state? Sorry. Yeah.
Do you know, Dennis, where it, like California or whatever? It looks like.
I mean, the George Floyd thing was in Minneapolis, right?
Yeah. So let's say the situation of Minneapolis.
The last uprising. Yeah, Minneapolis.
Yeah. So, like, given the situation in Minneapolis, which is structured, well, now we have some analytic tools to talk about it. We could talk about commodity logic, we can talk about state structure, we can talk about communities and things like this. Given something that you are able to capture a lot of information through these lenses, what can you expect from organizing in those? Well, if you organize with this in mind, you know that these other aspects are relevant, therefore some things might be now of interest or might be not something that is in the background. So you can actually construct, let's say, things that you can kind of see what happens if you take them further and see, or either you can talk about what happened, or you can actually propose something. For example, well, if there is a strong hold on social cooperation due to like platform capitalism, you cannot count on the relation between workers in this and that way. Therefore, you can look at organization this other way. Like you can actually construct this sort of mini scaffolding, and it's kind of a small, singular, possibly inconsistent version of the big things we were talking about with this multi-layered transcendental. So there should be something that you could call like, a weird, inconsistent, or kind of testing ground for some way of speaking about the world, right?
Yeah. So but for me, this is the whole point. I'm not sure. I'm not sure at this point within the stuff that I'm doing, I can construct a prospective model. Maybe this is asking too much, but the capacity for change and an explanation. Explanations for change are embedded in this framework.
That's what I was saying. Like, it seems to me like there is a quite natural way of talking about this whole testing, interactional kind of pragmatic approach.
The pragmatic approach is supposed to. What's kind of weird is like the pragmatic approach usually. Not sure if Reza is particularly successful in that, but usually is a form of uncoupling. It's not a form of coupling. Like the pragmatic approach is a form of uncoupling from the given in a sense. So you have to have like what you take to be given has to have explanatory traction because you take it to be given. So this has to have an explanatory traction. It has to have a place in it. But it can't be like a rigid designator, for instance. It can't be like a fixed ontology. Mm-hmm. So the pragmatic approach, the whole point is that, of course, the people who are working within this, they have different approaches, and some are more successful, some are less. For instance, Brandon is very usually criticized for being like a mostly a liberal, something like that. And maybe Pedro is right. That's a point of Reza's critique, even though we are not sure if Reza is more successful than Brandon. But anyway, there's different ways of going about this. I think Ray Brassier is doing something more radical with it. So the whole point is that, like, I myself, I'm a bit different from those because I have the Wittgensteinian basis, which is a bit different. Like and this I have in common with Gianotti, which is interesting. And the fact that Wittgenstein has a whole book which is called Übergewissheit, uncertainty. That is trying to say that the things you are certain is not because the world is that way. The things you are certain is because those are grammatical propositions that organize your world, and that world is, from the metaphysical standpoint, contingent. From your social standpoint, not. It might look like it's eternal and necessary, but from a metaphysical standpoint, it is contingent. It's because there are grammatical prepositions like that you uphold as true, that is organizing the whole world. Mm-hmm. So this is something that Gianotti builds upon, and Bento Prado Jr. is trying to discuss with him. And that this whole idea, for instance, of the clash between worlds. I think this is a very interesting framework that makes think about, for instance, the clash between worlds, because you have different measures, and it has like this weird connection to the Hegelian idea of measure. And by that, maybe through the Marxist idea, account of value, which is Gianotti's actual move there.
But you see, like, so now, just because actually, we're teaching this on Thursday, I think you said something which I never thought of it in this way, but now it makes total sense, right? That the distinction between regularity and singularity I was talking about becomes the distinction between the given and the pragmatic account.
Yeah.
Right. The given accounts for things in terms of it is so, right?
Yeah.
And the pragmatic tries to turn it. But the weird thing is that you move from the sort of given regularity to something that has no presuppositions. Then you go and you turn it into the metaphysics afterwards. So rather than saying it's historically contingent, you say it's metaphysically contingent. Like the struggle, it's because it's philosophical.
No, I'm not saying it's metaphysically different there. No, I'm saying from a metaphysical point of view, it's contingent. In the sense of it's not a metaphysical necessity. Like for instance, you read Kripke, you quoted in your book, like Kripke upholds metaphysical necessity.
Yeah. No, I get it. My point is simply that you see, like, you move from the given to the pragmatic, but then you take the pragmatic, which is a localized account now. Like, I don't know if this is how it's for everyone. I know that I can perfectly justify my reasons now with limited amount of information. I don't need this transcendental. And then you take this and say, look, now that I found a presuppositionless account, I can take it to be my metaphysical account. And now I have a contingent metaphysics.
Yeah.
And then the singularity disappears because it becomes the form of the regular.
Yeah, but it's like this interplay is always the case, right? Like
with philosophy. And that's where I think Badiou is smart, because he gives, I think he's a guy for pragmatics at the situated level. No wonder that the approaches seem to kind of correspond to each other much more closely, converge at that level, like post-event or generic. But from his approach, and I think that this is why he's aggressively critic of certain contemporary analytic philosophy, is that the name for taking the subjective process and turn it into the general process. That's exactly the matheme of the reactionary subject, which says that there is no new beginning. You get to every beginning just by continuing, right? So I think his problem is that you take possibly a very interesting account of reason and subjectivity But rather than allow it to be, let's say, the effect of undoings of this given historically, once you see that that works, you turn it into the very frame of your metaphysics. But then metaphysics doesn't need to account for why that happens, right?
No, I see what you mean, but of course, yeah. But I have a set of reasons to believe that this account is true.
Sure. No, I get. If life is good in that way, that's a good enough reason for me. I just feel like there is more stuff that's not enough.
I actually think that Wittgenstein has a true account of the functioning of language. I think that Sellers has a true account of the functioning of language. I am classical in that way, in that sense. I mean, in that philosophy. I mean, so I'm not really. I don't really. I won't really ban this account because I want to instrumentalize it for this and that. I really do think these are the best accounts of functioning of language, and I think it's a plus that they make change thinkable in a certain way. Maybe not a Badiouian way, but they make change thinkable. I mean, in Wittgenstein, you have these measures. You have, I think it's very interesting the way, for instance, that he talks about the relationship between bipolar propositions that are true or false, like these are empirical normal propositions, and what he thinks are grammatical propositions, which are polar propositions, which means they are not true or false. They are necessarily true because they organize the others. It's like there's this centrifugal movement around polar propositions. But sometimes the problem is Wittgenstein himself is a conservative philosopher. He doesn't think you can voluntarily revise your polar propositions, like bring about a different form of life because you want. But it is open that those polar propositions are sometimes they change. And the thing is,
no, it's okay, man. If you're happy with saying that a conservative, on your own words, account is true, okay. But
there's differences between the things I say, internal differences. Like in an account, his account of language is true, but he's not a political philosopher. You have to shift things in order to make it compatible with the political philosophy.
Okay. Yeah, just because I mean,
he's a conservative philosopher, but he's not a conservative philosopher, simpliciter, at all. Like he's one of the most radical philosophers that I know of, in the sense of what's thinkable in philosophy.
Yeah. No, I get that, but I have the impression that in order to make radical change in philosophy, what counts as radical there doesn't necessarily will, leave open space for big changes in other things. Like, for example, the very idea that you either have the sort of changeable accounts of the world that are kind of by language's own development lead to change, or voluntary attempts to change things. It's hard to, if those are the two options, it's very hard to kind of
like I gave you like a 5 minute account of what I believe, and you think these are the two only options, and you're saying, you are happy with a conservative philosopher. No, this has gone downwards now. Okay. No, it has gone.
Fuck, man. Okay, no, it's fine. I'm sorry, I didn't want to upset you. It's just that, I mean, we were having a discussion. You told me these things you take to be true. And then after you said that, you gave a short description. In that description, you use the distinction between rules of games can change on their kind of own accord, or you could have the other option, which we're not really counting because it doesn't.
No, that's not the issue. That was not the issue. Maybe we should continue this other occasion.
Okay, I mean, I didn't mean to upset you. I'm just trying to understand, like, as I said, it seems to me that things converge a lot under certain assumptions, but I don't have, it's not the pragmatic, not ludics, is not any of, or the critique of the given. None of that seems to create a sort of impasse in finding steps of research that share great common ground and also develop this political stuff further. It's just the taking of this pragmatic, ludic-like approach and turning it into the metaphysics that seems to erase the point where the steps could be taken. It makes it harder to make those steps. We were talking about that. Then you said, well, but I hold this to be metaphysically true.
No, I hold this to be true about language, about the functioning of language.
Yeah.
And yeah, okay, I think it's the best account of about the functioning of language.
Yeah,
that's the account.
Because when we talk about language, or in the case of Badiou phenomenology, right, we kind of have this tension between analytic and synthetic. So, like, language, I would say, at least my idea of it is, it does have this like descriptive, explanatory aspect, but that seems to be more of its synthetic aspects, or sorry, its analytic aspects, the ability to break things apart and kind of see the various ways you can partition the world. The synthetic aspect is the more mysterious one. It's the way that the analytic process fails in some sense, right? Something gets left out. In the case of Badiou, you have the atoms, and we talked about how like there's kind of this layer below the atoms, which is the site, or the kind of this opaque ground for novelty that's built into Badiou's system in the form of how the analytic part of logic's worlds fails, right? And then you have the whole theory of bodies. So I think what we're looking for when we talk about the language issue is where that is built in. And if it, I think Gabriel's saying it, he doesn't like how determined it is, right? Something like that. Whereas in Badiou, it seems like he leaves more space open on some level for
yeah, I think the opposite is defensible as well. I mean, because you don't presuppose a reference domain of reference that is given, you might reconceptualize things differently. I mean, the whole point of this kind of, the problem is you're asking me to like give you an account of stuff that will need like more than one whole presentation for it, like in a few minutes. So it's quite difficult. But
no, but
the idea is precisely to open up for this kind of first contingency of the reference, contingency of conceptual frameworks. Those are not necessary, but they nevertheless have explanatory traction upon reality. So you have to have both. This is the kind of difficult thing to achieve, because if you have like contingency of frameworks, it seems that then the referent is contingent, you're not explaining anything. So, of course, and there is a further difficulty is that those are, of course, not political philosophers. They are not primarily interested in political change. But that being said, I think their account of language is a good one. I think in that sense, I think it's a true one because I think it's one of the best that I know. I prefer it, for instance, to Kripke's account, for instance. Even though Kripke is brilliant, naming a necessity is brilliant, it's very interesting, it's very intelligent. I think it's not possible. For me, something between Wittgenstein, Sellers, and Brennan, not one of those, but something between those is more plausible. I think those are the best accounts of language there is, in a sense. So there is, I'm not saying these are the best, this is the best way to make politics. No, because this was not my primary interest when I approached these philosophers. What I'm interested in thinking is that if they make possible change in conceptual schemes, does it lends itself to political change as well, and under what terms? So this is a working question for me, and it's not only something that I'm interested in. There are different philosophers doing work that are similar in that sense. They are trying to even Brandon. The last book is all about he finally discovered politics. Pippin finally discovered politics, but at the same time, I think they are not sufficient for me, at least. So this was the idea. I don't think it's not really built in as in Badiou, because Badiou is always thinking about a domain of reference, and then he has to account for the possibility of change in the domain of reference, like in logics of worlds, is the inexistent usually that will emerge and account and begets form in real change, which I think it's very interesting and all of that. But this path is closed to the pragmatic approach, because you can't really presuppose as given a world, or presuppose as given uh, domain of reference, like, but you can presuppose. So you have to do it otherwise. And I think you can do it. I mean, but it's not presupposed that in the same way. Of course, it's not. Maybe for somebody who's more Badiouian, it will be insufficient. It will be kind of, how shall I say, too continuous. But you have also to see where those debates are happening. Like in the field of philosophy of language, these are the accounts that are not as continuous in a sense. These are the accounts that open up for change. So and this is because there is a kind of a framework of discussion that is happening. So it's very difficult. This is what I was talking before, that we are talking past each other, because there are kind of a presupposition of certain context of debates where it makes sense to defend the stuff that I usually defend as being the radical position in a sense. But there is a problem of translation between different worlds of philosophy, so to speak. So there's a problem of translation there. What is continuous for you guys is not continuous for me. Like, and yeah, I can't really see as continuous as you see. For instance, the inexistent in a world is a multiple that is. In a certain sense, there is a continuity as well. So I have a kind of difficulty deciding about the continuous, discontinuous issue. For me, it's kind of trivial. I think you can see it as continuous or not. There is, I agree with Gabriel, like there are certain points of view that are more, that you learn more from them, and maybe the point of view that upholds the discontinuity is more informative. I have no problem upholding that. But yeah, I don't know what else to say. I was upset because you made that little joke about, oh, you like the conservative philosopher. This was kind of upsetting because it's so reducing. Like I said so much more.
Yeah, I agree. That was a kind of a cheap shot. I mean,
but you know why I did a cheap shot? Can I just open my part of the aggressive moment as well? Dude, it's so much work. I read the text. I went into the stuff you want to research. I proposed a way to mediate. You didn't. I did. I'm totally coming in your direction. I'm saying, look, this converges.
I didn't. I'm kind of 1 year and a half studying Badiou with you guys.
I'm talking about today here. Like, obviously, I'm not interested in reducing your position to some conservative position. It's not the point. But again, like I went back to the text you guys brought. I was asking, how can we do something that shares some common ground? You know, for me, the statement, this is what I hold to be okay, fine. But again, like, you know, I can see why we should supplement Badiou with this more pragmatic approach. I'm trying to find common ground, and I think there's a lot of useful stuff.
I'm saying all the time that we need to supplement those stuff, but I think as an account of language, I'm being very specific, very localized, very regionalized here. I think those are the best accounts. So
I'm fine with that, but nobody was arguing against it. But if you take the best account of language and don't say, okay, what else needs to be added? But for example, Danny suggested, well, but is a theory, the best theory in the world about language gonna also be the theory about what doesn't count in a context as a logical atom, or will it have to be a different sort of framework that will make this sort of issue more transparent? Something must be said about that. Okay, you know, because we began today by moving from the critique of, well, it seems like there's something missing in talking about organizations think. I don't think that's the way. I'm fine with that. We were working through that. I'm totally trying to.
I didn't propose this as a critique of your approach.
But it's fine. Even if it were, it's fine. It's fine. It's no problem. It's just that
I don't understand what's that issue that. I mean, suddenly is an issue that this was portrayed as some kind of critique of the primer.
No, nobody's saying that this is a critique. No, man, I'm just saying that I'm trying to take seriously the things that don't fit in the way you approach these topics. But I mean, the point, again, I try to make it more precise, the point, and I think that when there is a big shift between pragmatic. I mean, even if you use the exact same tools to do both things and they both work, which is great, it might even mean something profound. But pragmatics as a set of interesting tools to talk about localized singular processes, and pragmatics as the general framework, which is validated because it gave us the best theory of language, I think that's exactly what makes us talk past each other. So when I say that,
why is that theory the infrastructure? I mean, the same is applicable to.
I don't know. I feel like we're making progress. I'm not even. I don't even think you need to.
I think we are making progress. Like you see, there's an issue.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to understand. Like,
I mean, I like a lot of what Badiou says. I wouldn't.
I'm not trying to defend Badiou, dude.
Yeah, I wouldn't lose my time studying as deeply as we did, like for more than 1 year. If I thought this was bullshit, I wouldn't be teaching it. I wouldn't be writing about it. But I think you have alternative ways of founding your philosophical project other than.
I'm not arguing for or against philosophers, dude. I'm just saying, like, in the context of this research, since we're talking about trying to, I mean, I'm willing to spend time doing this, like understanding these things better. I want to understand better how you guys are thinking. I asked about how you guys are motivating your own research. Then I'm just trying to see, okay, is that account of the space of reasons with regards to capital useful? Is that a way of bringing this into the sort of pragmatic, localized account? I'm just trying to show, like, obviously nobody is dismissing your whole project, but also it's not about justifying if the project is good or bad.
I see that this is not happening, but I feel that you think I'm dismissing your project.
No, I just want to make more specifics. Like, I just wanted to funnel things to more specific things we can do. Like, I don't know, for example, I feel like there's a lot I can more easily see on how to negotiate with, for example, bias rationality and this way of separating the set of all presuppositions you need to take into account from the set of presuppositions each actor holds individually. Like, I can see how this can be easily put into a common framework and lead to profitable discussions. And it's not, I don't need to ask the question, is this the general account of everything or not? That's a secondary
No,
question.
you don't need to ask, but this for some reason you asked this, and I was answering. I don't know. This was part of the discussion today, like because of Reza, perhaps. I don't know. I think, yeah, maybe it's not. We don't need to go there, but it happened.
Yeah, but again, I'm just the point that got me to make perhaps a cheap assault is just that the moment that it seems like we're moving towards, okay, the convergence in the situated point, we stopped and we then said, okay, I hold this to be true as a theory of language. And then we weren't anymore talking about, and I'm saying, okay, fine. Okay. I have no, fine. There are thousands of good philosophical projects, and it's good that in the object that you're studying, you're convinced that this is a good approach. It's perfect. It's no problem at all. But what about the thing we were talking about? And my impression is, again, as I said to you and Pedro before, that I get the impression that the form of statements that we are looking to make that would have relevance in going further from the perspective of this holds for language is then that if this holds generally, then this other statement should hold for politics. And that form of statement is the thing that I think is getting in the way, because that form of regular statement, this is the most general law, therefore this is a particular consequence for political action. That form of statement, I think, that's the only part where it's contradictory, where it seems it's moving from metaphysics to politics, the most general to the particular. That's what I was trying to state. Like, that form of argument, I think, is the thing that blocks. But you also told me that this is not really how it goes, and it's not really that way. Okay, which is fine. Then let's see what else we can do. But that's the sort of thing I was trying to funnel to the point where I think there is a mismatch. Every time pragmatics enters the picture as a local account of breaking away from something that was given and constructing it to some sort of pragmatic testing, it seems to me that there's a lot of room to work, because the odds are not falling from what's generally true. Every time this becomes the new metaphysical discussion, which in another context might yield many useful propositions, it seems that for political discussion in this circumscribed context, it's harder to see what could be done. So again, nothing against the project, nothing against holding it to be true. It's a matter of refining the way that we strategize the use of these tools so that we don't get lost always back on the general account of thinking, the general account of these things, which...
No, but I think that there's something to be said. I think, like, I think I'm starting to understand the thing better, but I think that, you know, like in relation to what we're talking about, because I think that this that you just said, like, oh, if this is the general, like, if this holds for language, like, then it holds for political thought. But I think that the question, and I think that all of this circumscribes very neatly, it's like, why doesn't it do? Right? Like, and I think that this is sort of like, I think a lot of these tools, and I think that this is like the question that I think like interests both me and JP is like that, like, why doesn't it do? And I think that, like, having like I think that bringing the sort of like substrate of like game theory and game semantics, I think it helps to sort of like, if you have like, and like now I'm just thinking through the things, but like if you have like a formal account of like how does this inferential picture would work, then you have like also a formal account of how it scales, because like because I think that this is like where I would see like precisely the sort of like the discontinuity between these two things would be at, right? Like of this, like, okay, like this holds for language, why doesn't it hold for political organization or for political thinking or for political action or for just like general action? Because I think that this is where this is where it's actually more problematic in a certain sense, right? Like, why is this like a credible theory of language use, but not a credible theory of agential behavior, so to speak. And I think that like this is precisely what I think it's being
it's a credible theory for agential behavior in general?
No, well, I think it is, but it's like, well, getting from one to the other is like a massive problem, I think. And this is like, for instance, why, like why initially Brassier went from Sellers to Marx, because he felt that there's something like in this gap between Sellers and Marx, which, like different people think different things about it, but like that there's something there that like from the behavior of like a single agent within this sort of like prearranged, let's say, normative structure, and a sort of like more collective instantiation of it, and the real, like, as I understand it, like the real like contradiction, so to speak, which I don't really think it's a contradiction, is like how can one thing be like propped up by communization and be at the same time diffused by it? And this is like really the contradiction, I think, in this position, right? Like, I don't think it's a contradiction per se. I think it's like I think it's like, at least in the way that I understand, and I think the thinking about like bounded rationality, but also like something that it's really underdeveloped is like how agents are composed within political structures, right? Like in terms of decision making and goals. But I think that this is really the tension in this position, right? Like, and I think that like in my mind, like the work on ludics and game semantics really tries to sort of like, okay, like the structure is here, but like how does it not scale to this other like scale of resolution, of course. And I think that this is really why there's a contradiction in this position. Like, I do think it holds for language, and that it doesn't hold for agent-based behavior, but there's no real at this point in time, there's no real like why. And I think that like by trying to formalize, I think by like going with you guys through what you're working, I think it helps to sort of like arrange resources to build this, because I think that like I do think that the formal stuff has like, of course, like really good behavior. I think that like, at least I think me and JP differ a bit, that in the sense that like I'm like very much like Carnapian, in the sense that like I don't care about metaphysics. Like I don't want to metaphysicize all of this. I think it's just like, this is how human language works and human agents work. But I think that like having like a substantial description of this particular contradiction is like key to having like a good like actually good theory of political action qua rational beings. Like I think that like to resolve this contradiction is really the thing, that like how come we can think and reason like collectively or individually, but not in these spheres that matter. And I think that this is actually like, yeah, that's the $1 million question, right?
I like the $1 million part, but I guess it's not a millennium thing. It's just,
well, $1 million is not worth anything. Like it has to be $1 billion. Now they have like, I think 800 billionaires, like billionaires with more than 100 billions. You have to sort of like up the stakes a little bit.
Yeah, up the stakes.
Inflation, yeah.
Yeah, you have to inflate. There's no $1 million. Like the $1 million question is just like whoever wins Big Brother Brazil.
But I hope it was already, somebody already won.
Yeah, I know it finished, and I know
Okay.
it's 1.5 million.
Okay, so you're not totally under. Okay, but look, it's really late. I just really didn't want you go thinking that I was like dismissing your approach or anything like this. But again, I'm not sure if I hope I'm not being unfair here, but like, it might be that it takes time to see connections. It might be that, you know, we're experimenting with a bunch of stuff and the connections will appear in time. But I'm glad that we're taking the time to try to make, you know, clearer connections, because at some moment it doesn't seem like it's not coming, the connections are not appearing simply because it takes time. It takes, you know, some some positive effort, you know, to make them appear, I think.
Yeah, I think I could put it this way, like I agree with this. Like, there is a best account of language, and there's also a best account of political action, right? You have Marx and Badiou, which I think is the best account of political novelty. Then you have like this Wittgensteinian account of language. And those are the two best accounts of their respective things, right? So you would hope that you could get at something like a political language, or a language to describe political transformation.
Yeah, this is kind of a project, actually. You are describing my project in a sense. One part of it, like what interests me in this.
Yeah. So it is a problem. Yeah. Like,
yeah.
That we're all interested in.
No, the thing about the connection and stuff, I think you were kind of hasty about it, Gabriel, because as I told you like a few moments ago, like I was studying Gianotti exactly trying to build the connection between the language approach and what you guys are doing in the primer. Like, this was the whole point of doing the Gianotti thing. So it needed time because I'm studying, I'm going through the stuff and studying it and seeing if I can do a presentation on this soon or not. So this was just this was the meaning of what I was saying in the group. I think it's a bit hasty to say beforehand, oh, well, let's study ludics because this is the connection. Yeah, I'm not sure what the connection is. What I know is that ludics is interesting for me and Pedro for these reasons, for several reasons that we talked today, and it came up during Dennis's presentations as well. Some part of ludic, some part of it came up before. So let's take a look into it. Just that was the idea. I think the connections that were there because it came up in a sense. It came up during the meetings in a sense. And of course, it was something that interests me and Pedro particularly, perhaps because of the connection to Reza, to Luca Fraser, and these thinkers. But yeah, the connection is being built. So I mean, I chose Gianotti because of that, because of the connection to Marx and the primer and all of that, trying to build a bridge between, you know, this language games approach and what you guys are doing. So this was the whole point, really.
No, but I'm not disagreeing. I find that amazing. I'm definitely interested in listening to it. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that, again, as I said, it's clear that every time we converge into a situated issue, it's very easy to dialogue. It's the point about, let's say, kind of refining how we translate this sort of, you know, background commitments of what Dennis called like a really good description of political action to the background commitments of a really good description of language. It's the background commitments that I think that make the form of this thing appearing, the discussion, seem like things are further away than they really are, because when you go to the nitty-gritty part of it, obviously everything is in very, very close connection. My point was about this, like, I was trying to make a statement about why it is that it is the move from the pragmatic as situated to the pragmatics as the situating term, the more metaphysical account, that seems to break the movement, right? That's where it becomes hard.
The thing is, we'll rehearse the problem of back assumptions, like the pragmatics. Once you recognize that there is there is an importance to pragmatics in the functioning of language, and it is not anymore that localized. It is actually, it becomes an account of language. The thing with, why is it that everything in Badiou is built upon set theory? Like, I mean, of course, it is a medium that he's using, and eventually he localized things and everything, but nevertheless, there is a background assumption. There is I mean, you have to have one in a sense, right? I mean, you can't really
again, it's a
think of
diplomatic
everything
question
again for every single situation. I mean, if you are in the business of theorizing, you have to make things fit in a sense. So
sure, I'm not talking about philosophy. I'm talking about diplomacy. Like, I'm saying that it becomes easier when we are aware that this is the part that looks like makes the conversation go like create more objects.
Yeah, but it's not that easy. It's not about diplomacy. I mean, I feel you were kind of accusing me again there talking about diplomacy, but okay. It's not that easy. I think this slips into the subjects. Like, we are interested in ludics. Maybe you are not so interested in that, and then it becomes a problem. But this was not an issue of diplomacy. I thought, because last week's presentation was successful, everybody seemed to have enjoyed it, that it would be good to do a second.
Again, it's really cool. I was spend the whole day, every moment that I had free, trying to study this. It's when I mean diplomacy, again, to facilitate further communication down the road. The moment that I said this, your reply was, no, but I hold this to be true. And that pissed me off, because I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm just saying, this is the sort of thing that the more you are aware of, the easier it becomes.
Okay, this was not framed as diplomacy. This was framed as the problem between having a localized pragmatic account and let us call it an universal pragmatic account. But if you recognize that the pragmatic account is the best, it is only suitable to think that maybe this is the best account of language in general. This was what I meant. This was what I meant when I said I hope this to be true, because I was giving you I was testifying to why I think this is interesting. Well, because I think it gives an account of language that has certain properties that are more interesting.
I'm more and more convinced by it. I'm liking it more and more. The more you guys present on it, I'm more convinced by it. It's just that I feel like it's not that hard to give you that space and still be able to talk about these things. And sometimes it doesn't seem like the inverse is true. Like the clash of underlying commitments is strong enough to say, okay, perhaps this is not a direction that we should explore. And I don't feel like that's the case. I think those two things are totally possible, to clash background commitments and still focus on things that are more localized. So I was trying to give you my impression of what works in our common space. And it did seem like a sort of boundary, like, no, like you either buy the whole package or you don't, kind of response. And that's why I gave you back a kind of a snarky remark. I totally agree, unwarranted for, but a snarky remark in the sense of, do you really want to buy the whole package? Because you don't. You actually buy the whole package in terms of the theory of language.
That I don't buy the whole package.
Yes,
I just
exactly.
Language,
that's why I made the snarky remark. But again, that point was very localized in the spirit of, this seems to separate better everything that is in common, and the point of a disagreement that could be studied in more detail and perhaps even clarified and so on, but that is not really at stake. So, I mean, that's what it seemed to be about. I like the way Dennis put it. I mean, and I get now what Pedro is saying also, which is a very interesting problem, because it seems like the moment we translate these things in terms of actions, there is a problem from both senses, right? There is an uncharted territory from the perspective we're coming, but there's also $1 million question from the perspective where you guys are coming from, right? So it is a bit of a leap there for everyone, right? From the best account of language to an account of action, and from an account of politics to an account of situated, restricted action as well. So I'm just trying to funnel on the common part. And I'm not sure if diplomacy sounded aggressive, but in the sense of stating what it seems to me to be something that if we are aware of, even though it obviously seeps in back into the discussion time and time again. But as I told you, like, I'm willing to give up on certain terms. I don't find, like, I don't need to call these things thinking or whatever. That's not really important. Like, if it, you know, I started from a position where I called subject language and things that were very different. So I'm okay with, like, let's find another name. So it's in the spirit of understanding what changes so that we can focus on things that we can step forward, give other accounts and better accounts, discuss things that actually build together. I don't know, like, for example, I'm trying to get a book deal that we could write together. It would be good if we, again, develop some common ground that, even though it will surely seem like a loss in terms of perfect commitments on both sides, produces something that is readable for a larger audience and that does say something useful on political matters. So it will require this sort of translation, negotiation, saying, okay, at that point, I know you mean something else by the term, but I'm willing to concede that you use the word that I like to be used in another way. Without those things, it will be hard to move, you know? And I mean, I'm already not using some terms the way that I'm accustomed, because I feel like you're coming from a background where they're much more fully fledged and they have a much more important point in the tradition. But it's good to do that, you know, as a method for all of us. I think it will help. That's what I'm calling connections. It's not like you should be studying this for that reason. Connections in that very vague sense of it will take building some way of approaching this, right? And saying, okay, this battle here, I'll tab Gabriel some other time. I'll, you know, give my retort some other time, but this other thing here seems to hold. It's, for me, it was the end discussion was about this, and trying to, again, that's why we were building that thing about the space of reasons and things, is to see, okay, I would like to contribute to the way you guys are approaching things. Like, I wouldn't just want to stay in my lane, and when things touch together, they touched. Like, I wish I can sit down with this text and say something that is useful for what you guys are doing, and that. But you have to, you know, it's weird. It's not easy.
Yeah, I gotta go, but yeah, I think it's just like building these Rosetta Stones, right? Like many of them.
Yeah, I think it's about that. I don't know. But yeah, I also need to eat. I imagine everyone is either hungry or past bad time or something.
Yeah, we're at some point we're like, oh, let's not finish too late today.
Yeah,
like can't go until 10. It's like 11.
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, I saw that the time moving, and yeah, I need to go. Okay. See you guys.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Desculpa
por qualquer coisa. See you. Bye.